This is a look at red-green Scapeshift. This deck has been becoming more and more popular the past few weeks after it saw play at Worlds. We saw Oliver 2 go 4-0 with it in Modern. And this is the standard main deck at the moment. For Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, the signature land that incentivizes you to play a bunch of mountains, so that once you go beyond 5 mountains in play, all of your mountains essentially become a lightning bolt. And then if you have multiple Valakuts in play, then each mountain becomes a double lightning bolt, and so on. So those lightning bolts can really add up and kill your opponent or otherwise go after opposing creatures. There are 3 basic forests here because you do want to have some basics, because a lot of the search effects search for specifically basic lands, so you can't get a card like Cinderglade or Stomping Ground, even though they are essentially your best mountains, because they're mountains that produce both green and red mana. We've got 2 copies of Summoner's Pact, which is more or less a 6 mana card, because we're basically just using it to search for Primeval Titan. So it's Primeval Titan, basically number 5 and 6, because Primeval Titan is one of our best cards and one of the ways we win the game. We're not playing Through the Breach, but we're still playing Primeval Titan. 4 copies of Bolt, because Bolt is just the best red spell in Modern. It's just 1 mana, deal 3 is really important. It helps you stay alive. This deck isn't the fastest combo deck on the block, so you really want to have some disruption in order to get to the point where you're able to burn your opponent out with Valakut. So at 2 mana we've got a bunch of search, but before I get to the 2 mana cards, let's talk about search for tomorrow, because this is a card we can suspend on turn 1, and a lot of the times that's preferred to waiting to hardcast it. If you can, you're going to suspend it early. Otherwise you can cast it late as just a 3 mana get an untapped basic, which isn't the worst, but we do want to be suspending search for tomorrow on turn 1 a lot of games. And then turn 2 we've got our Colony Heart Expeditions. So this is one of the cards that doesn't see play in all of the lists, but it's a 2 mana enchantment that can search for 2 lands. So it's the only ramp card, essentially, besides Primeval Titan, if you're going to count it, but it's the only ramp card that searches you for 2 lands, and that's pretty important for just a 2 mana investment. The only thing is you do need to play 3 lands after it, but fetch lands basically count as being 2 lands for Colony Heart Expedition that are coming to play, because it's the fetch land and then the land you find from the fetch itself. And then with all the other cards that search for lands, getting this to 3 quest counters isn't actually that difficult. Sakura Tribe Elder is basically just better than Rampant Growth because it's a creature. You can jump block with it. You can even in some spots nibble in for a point of damage, which can be relevant since you want your opponent to be at 18 a lot of games. And Farseek is basically we're playing another Rampant Growth. It's just more redundancy. And then Explore is a cantrip. It helps if we have a bunch of lands in hand to start the game, and we are playing 27 lands, so it's not unreasonable to just have a bunch of lands in our hand. And so this becomes not only a ramp spell, but also a draw spell to help find our big cards to win us the game. So we're playing a lot of ramp, and that's pretty typical of this deck. Not that much interaction. So the interaction is the 4 bolts, but we've also got 2 Anger of the Gods as a sweeper effect. Anger of the Gods is going to be very good against certain decks, and then a lot of the times it will get boarded out, but it's one of those high variance cards where it's good where it's good, it's bad where it's bad, but it's still worth having in the main deck because the decks where it's good against are worse matchups, and the decks where it's bad against are some of our better matchups. And then these are our big cards, the cards that are going to allow us to win the game. So Scapeshift, if we have 7 lands in play, we're going to search for Valakut in 6 different mountains, and then deal our opponent, or we're going to have 18 damage available to us. We can deal it to our opponent. If our opponent's at 18 or less, we can just kill our opponent. If our opponent's at more than 18, we can go after our opponent's creatures or at our opponent's face. But then if we wait and then we have 8 lands in play, we're able to search for an extra Valakut, still get the 6 mountains, but then we have 36 damage instead of 18 because it doubles because of the additional Valakut. So there will be spots where we want to wait until 8 lands before casting the Scapeshift at all. And also 4 copies of Primeval Titan. So Primeval Titan is one of our easiest ways to win. We play it. We either assemble the Valakut combo, meaning we have 5 mountains and multiple Valakuts so that next turn we can win, or we're just starting to machine gun at our opponent's face with the mountains, and if your opponent deals with the first Titan, then the second Titan is probably going to be good enough. So Primeval Titan is just a super powerful card, and this is the exact deck that you wanted in. So, and as I mentioned earlier, we do have Summoner's Pact, so we basically have 10 of our game-winning spells. The Summoner's Pact, the Primeval Titans, and then the Scapeshift, and that's going to help us turbo out the Valakut and mountains in order to win the game. So our sideboard is going to be geared towards some of the faster decks in the format, the creature-based decks. So we've got some burn here. Sudden Shock is good against decks like Infact, decks like Affinity, that rely on beating you quickly with creatures. Anger of the Gods, similarly, is good against those decks, but it's also good against the Malira combo decks and any decks that really want to put creatures in their graveyard rather than having them exiled. This is going to be especially nice. Obstinate Baloth is here not only for the burn type decks and zoo decks, but also as a way to counteract our opponent's Liliana of the Veil. Since Liliana is so good against us, we board an Obstinate Baloth, and all of a sudden, if we do have a Baloth and our opponent takes up a Lily, we put it into play, and then we can attack the Lily next turn, so that's pretty sweet. Tireless Tracker and Courser are not in all of the lists, but they're basically value creatures that could be in the main deck. They're in the sideboard instead, and basically help give us a little bit more gas against the more mid-rangey and control decks of the format. Ancient Grudge clearly is good against Affinity. And let's see, lose a couple cards. Here we go. So we've also got 2 copies of Nature's Claim, which is another artifact removal spell, but it's also enchantment removal. That's why we're going with the split between Nature's Claim and Ancient Grudge. We've got 1 Engineered Explosive. Some play more, but some lists play more, but we can only play it for up to Sunburst for 2. It's still a super powerful card, and it's one of the most played cards in Modern. Here we've got 1. It's very versatile. And then the 2 copies of Chalice will come in against a lot of the combo decks of the format, even though sometimes it counters our own stuff. We're more worried about what our opponent's doing when we do decide to board in Chalice of the Void. So this is the list, and while a ton of players have already started picking this deck up because it's become one of the most popular Modern decks, I have not gotten that much of a chance to play with it, so pretty excited to do it here and look into some of the finer details of the deck, and let's go.